Well, hello, RC from the Mountaintop Joiner Shop here. I just took on my first commission in quite some time, and I'm pretty excited about it because it's actually for a friend of mine. Well, it's actually for his daughter, who is a teenager now, and this is a design that is going to be a desk that she can carry on into her college years. And me and this guy go way back. I actually held his daughter when she was a little baby, and this is before I was at all comfortable holding babies, so it's quite some time ago. And now that she's a little bit older, they want to surprise her with a custom-made desk by this guy. Before I have you join me in breaking down the stock for this project, I thought it might make sense to give you an idea of what this project is ultimately going to look like. Part of the reason I'm excited about it is that there are some design challenges and build challenges in it that I think should make for a pretty fun adventure. So why don't we go down to my desk and take a look at what this project's kind of inspiration is coming from. Okay, so here I am over at my signature Bargueño desk, and because I know people are going to ask about it, I built this desk, or started to build this desk, before I started my YouTube channel, so there is no build series on this desk. However, I did do some videos about the design when it was in progress, and I did a big, very exhaustive tour of the whole desk, all the ins and outs and what have yous, all the flaps and drawers and hidden compartments and all that, and I'll link to those videos in the description. And the reason I bring this up at all is because there's something about the design process of this desk that I'm going to employ again for the desk that I'm about to build. So even though the designs of these two desks are completely different, they will share that in common. And we'll talk about that some more in a minute, but first I'd like to bring you in a little bit closer so you can see the desk that inspired the one that I'm about to build. Okay, so I don't really have the tech savvy to share my screen with you in a digital kind of way, so I just plop my camera in front of my computer monitor and hope for the best. So I hope this works out okay. But of all the desks that my friend's daughter looked at that appealed most, this was it. And you can see it's kind of a hyper-modernist, kind of post-MCM kind of look here. And the first thing that jumps out at me is the skinniness of the desk itself. And the reason they're able to get away with that in this case is because these legs and the understructure that attaches the legs both to each other and to the desk, the main body of the desk itself, are all made of metal. I think it's maybe stamped steel or something like that. That's not going to work for me. I don't work in metal, and I don't like to build projects that look like they might break. So I'm going to have to put some thicker legs on here that are made of wood, and that's going to require me to thicken the aprons as they approach the corners in order to make that connection between the body of the desk and the legs nice and strong. And another reason that I'm going to need to do that is the desk that they want for me is considerably larger than this one. It's going to be longer and deeper than this. That's another reason people might have an impetus to buy a custom desk from somebody like myself, is because they want it to have certain dimensions to fit in a certain space that aren't available commercially. Another thing about this desk that jumps out at me is how the white and the walnut play off of each other. I actually like that a lot. However, the work surface is, I don't know, maybe plywood or something. It's a solid white. I don't like that at all. It has a sterility to it that, to me, kind of lacks soul. I'm much more a proponent of natural materials. So what I would do in this case is maybe make the work surface from like a quarter sawn white oak and then bleach or whitewash that oak, but not paint it white. So you can still tell that the work surface is made from a natural material. That's important to me. Another thing about this desk that I kind of like and kind of don't is this raised area in the back. This gives you an opportunity for extra storage. However, that storage is quite small, and it's accessed in this design by some lift-off flaps. Those lift-off flaps can get in the way, they can get lost, they can get damaged. I don't love that. So what I would prefer to do in this case is make that raised area more raised, and that affords you the opportunity to fit a drawer in here and here. So the left and right sides on either side of the work surface will have a little drawer that you can pull out and store small stuff in. And then the middle section of this desk also has a lift-off flap, and in this case a very large one. Again, not a fan of that. I would much rather this flap be on some kind of hinge, but it does have a large cord port here, and of course any modern desk is going to have to incorporate that to be practical. Oh, and there's also a pencil drawer. That's something that I know my friend wants the design that I'm doing to incorporate as well. So basically what I'm doing is using this desk as an inspiration for the one that I want to build. It's going to be similar, but definitely not the same. That gives you an idea of what this desk will ultimately look like. And outside of what I just described to you, I don't have any drawings of this desk. To do this in a pencil drawing for me would be very difficult. My drawing skills, I don't think, are up to par in that way. And I don't think any drawing that I would do of this would do it justice anyways, what I actually have in mind in my head. I could also maybe draw it in a 3D drafting program like SketchUp or something like that. I don't have the technical skills to pull that off either because there are all kinds of angles going on here. You can see how the edges of this desk, the sides of it, actually have an outward cant to them. As soon as you get into angles and curves like that, as far as 3D drafting is concerned, I'm out. I would spend so many hours trying to figure out how to draw that up in a computer model that I could have actually spent, building the desk. Thankfully for me, this client has ordered commissions in the past. They know what I'm capable of. They know that this Bargueño desk that I'm sitting at right now was one that I built entirely on the fly. There was no plans drawn up anywhere for this desk, and it turned out pretty good, I would like to think. So I was able to convince them that I could do this desk without any kind of plans or paper drawings or computer models. It's all in the noggin. That means that I'm going to have to be very careful and thoughtful about every step of the design and the build process so I don't accidentally trip myself and work myself into a corner. But even in years gone by where I've managed to work myself into a corner like that, I was able to work my way out. So this should be an exciting little project here. Let's go back up to the garage and do some breaking down of stock. Okay, so I've started cutting out my stock already. I have a little stack of boards going right here. This is going to be the stock for the aprons. And that part is pretty straightforward. It basically starts with selecting boards that don't have, weird knots in them and stuff that might get in the way. Walnut tends to be a pretty gnarly tree, so it's sometimes difficult to find long boards that have a relatively straight grain in them, but I managed pretty well, I believe. I also chose boards that are a little bit darker in color. I like that warm chocolatey look. Sometimes walnut boards have sapwood in them that's significantly lighter than the heartwood. If it does include that, what lumber dealers will sometimes do is steam the wood, and that kind of brings those two contrasting colors to where they meet in the middle somewhere, and so you just kind of a muddy brown. To me, it doesn't look that great. So thankfully, these boards don't appear to be steamed and they don't have a lot of sapwood in them. And the grain is pretty straight. So all I had to do was lay those boards down on my saw bench and then cut them to rough length, a little bit over long, with my crosscut panel saw. So these guys are ready for the next step, which is, of course, is milling and flattening. But what I want to do next is cut out my leg stock, and that's not as straightforward as cutting out the stock for the aprons because my legs have kind of a signature shape to them where there's an asymmetric curve on the back side of the leg, and the legs that are in the front of the desk in particular, I want to have a grain that kind of follows that curve to the leg as much as possible. The legs in the back aren't as important. The ones that are out front and center, to my mind, really need to have a grain that follows that curve as much as possible, and I can show you an example here. So I have a knot right here on the board, but the grain right here has a curve to it that accelerates and then slows down and straightens out pretty well as it goes along. So this is a perfect piece of this board to cut a leg from. Because I'm steering around various knots and things like this and trying to get the grain to match the curve of the leg as much as possible, I don't want to just willy-nilly start cross-cutting here because I'm going to have probably some overlap between some of these legs to try to make the best use of this board that I can. What I'm going to do instead of just putting cross cuts a little over long on here and just cutting the board shorter at risk of not being able to get all the legs I need out of this board, what I'm going to do is create a template. So I'm just going to grab a big cardboard box laying around. I'm going to draw out the rough outline of the leg shape, and then I'm going to use that outline to trace onto the board where I think it matches best the grain that's already present in the board, and then I'll be able to cut around all of that in order to get the stock that I need. Hope that makes sense. Oh, and before I take these off, I really do got to give a shout out to the maker of these gloves. They're not a sponsor, but this is the Showa Atlas glove, And the Atlas 370, I guess is what these are called. It's a nitrile glove. These are the mediums. They fit my fingers perfectly. I absolutely love these work gloves. They're freaking awesome. I use them for moving rough lumber around. I use them in the garden. I use them when working on the trailer. Anytime I'm going to be doing something that I need to protect my hands and not get them dirty and have really good dexterity and grip, this is what I go to. So I'll leave an affiliate link in the description of this video for these gloves if you want to pick up a pair and try them out. They are often imitated but never duplicated. These things are freaking awesome. Showa Atlas. Check them out. Okay, so I'm going through the process of milling, and things are already getting a little bit complicated, but I'll bring you up to speed with where I'm at. You can see I've already started to mill the legs, and that they already have that little bit of a asymmetric taper to them with a curve, asymmetric curve. So these the signature leg shape is taking shape, so to speak, not to be redundant. But you'll also notice if you look at the way the grain lines follow the curve, that's what I'm going for with these. And in all cases, when I'm shaping a furniture part, I look at the grain lines and see if I can't get the grain lines to work harmoniously with the curves I'm cutting into those parts. So I spend a lot of time with stock selection for that reason. Your projects will always look better if you put any thought at all into the grain patterns than if you just kind of threw everything together and cut your parts out willy-nilly. So it's worth the effort in my opinion. You also notice on the back side of this leg, there's a lot of sapwood going on. What that tells me is that this leg is going to need to go on the right side of the desk. Because if I put it on the left, it's going to be all sapwoody. And also those grain lines don't follow that curve quite the way I would like. So this is going to go on the right side of the desk, either in the front or in the back. So its pretty face is what is showing in the long run. And then things with the aprons have gotten a little bit complicated already. Normally milling is a pretty straightforward process. You're just flattening your boards and then thicknessing them until both sides are parallel to each other. But ultimately, these sides are not going to be parallel to each other. So I'm going to show you what's going on with the taper that I'm going to be putting on these aprons. So the side aprons, and at least the front apron, and possibly the back as well, are all going to have an inward taper to them. So the sides will be like this on the exterior of the aprons. And of course the front will do the same thing at the bottom edge. It'll taper inwards. So the whole thing's going to kind of have this like a kind of a cant to it, like you would see on like a metal tub or something like that. So I'm going to bring it in a little bit closer and show you what my plan is for creating that tapered shape. All right, so this is ultimately what's going to be my left side apron, and this is the top and this is the bottom. And you can see I've drawn a line here that shows how much material I need to take off here. So the top is going to be nice and thick and the bottom is going to taper down to, I don't know, 5 or 6 mil, 1/4 inch, something like that. And if I need to, I'll reinforce this bottom edge of the apron with kind of a strip to make it a little bit thicker and a little bit easier to grip when you want to move the table, or the desk in this case. So you can see that I have to remove quite a bit of material, and rather than do that with hand planes until I'm blue in the face and my back hurts and all that fun stuff, I'm just going to make a little shim that fits underneath this apron and then run that through the thickness planer such that it has a cant to it. Another thing that's going on with these side aprons is they're actually taller than the front apron is. So I've removed a strip of material off of the side aprons. One of the reasons I removed that strip from the side aprons is because these side aprons are going to be necessarily taller than the front apron is. These are going to have a shape to them in which it's going to be nice and narrow, and it's going to thicken to meet the leg in the front. But in the back, it's actually going to taper upwards to create the raised back end of the desk where those drawers are going to be. And I don't want the taper to continue the full height of these side aprons because I just feel like that's too large a surface area to have that kind of feature. It'll be a little bit too monolithic. So what I'm going to do is taper the side aprons, but have this strip at the top here be vertical. A lot going on here. But what I need to do now, in order to get the taper that I want on these side and front aprons, and you'll notice these are the exact same height, the side and the front, I'm going to have to mill down a strip of wood that was an offcut from these long aprons that I can then put underneath that long apron to taper it. Then I can cut that same shim to length such that it matches the length of my side aprons, and do the same process of running it through the thickness planer to remove that extra material. If it doesn't make sense now, hopefully it will in a minute. It makes sense in my head. Okay, so this is the beginnings of the riser strip I was talking about. And the way I determine the thickness of this riser strip is basically measuring from this corner down to where that line meets the edge of the board. So as you can see, that matches up pretty close. But when I put it on there to rise it up and make it such that I can run it through the planer and remove all this material, I can see it doesn't mate up very well. So I need to cut an angle into this little riser strip in order to make it kind of stick to this board better when I run it through the planer and make the angle that I'm looking for. So the way I'm going to determine that is to lay this on top here and grab a pencil and mark a line right there. Then I just need to measure from this line where it meets the edge down to the black line on the edge there. And then I'll set a marking gauge for that distance, put it on here, and remove any material above that line. So I'll put a marking gauge line on this outside edge here and just plane down to that while leaving this corner on here alone. So we don't want to remove any material here, just on this corner. All right, so I have planed that angle down just using my jointer plane, and I just put it on a planing stop with some planing stops to keep it from moving that way. I put a marking gauge line on this edge like I said I was gonna, and then in order to keep track of my progress on this corner, what I did was take a carpenter's pencil and just put a bunch of tick marks on the top face of the board all the way down to the end there. Then I could watch those pencil lines disappear as I approach this corner, and if you do it right, you should end up at this corner and this corner kind of simultaneously as you're planing. And that's how I got to this resultant angle. And of course the test is to see if it actually does what I'm hoping it will do, which is made up to this other board at the angle that I want it to match. Look like we're doing pretty good there. So what I'm gonna do is tape this strip to my aprons and then put this face on the bottom here, on the bottom in my thickness planer, and remove all this material above this black line right here. And of course, when I get to these shorter aprons, I'm just going to cut the length of my strip down to match. Okay, so that went about as well as I could have hoped. There's a little bit of planer snipe at the ends of these, but other than that, it turned out great. So you can see that there's a nice taper to it. So what's going to end up happening is this is the front apron. The back side of this is going to remain vertical, and that's going to make it easier for me to build out the kind of the inside structure of the desk. And of course, this top edge is perpendicular to the back. So that's my reference face, edge, and corner. And I should be able to work from that when I do the rest of the joinery. Before I do these side aprons the same way, I gotta do something. You recall that I wanted to make these side aprons taller by adding an offcut from the same board, so you can see that the grain matches. But I want that offcut to be offset from the face of the lower side aprons, kind of like that. So there's a little bit of a step to it. And then I'm going to chamfer that inside edge to kind of match up to where that upper apron is. But this upper apron is going to remain vertical. This isn't going to have the taper that this part of the apron is. So this lower apron on the left and right side is going to match the front apron perfectly. And then the part that rises up to create the drawer box in the back there is going to remain vertical with a little bit of a chamfered step. Hope that all makes sense. And of course, in order to achieve that, I need to do some edge planing and putting something in here for the sake of alignment to get that step or reveal or whatever you want to call it perfectly even from end to end. Normally what I do is use dowels for that. I gotta do that before I taper these side aprons using the technique that I just showed you. All right, so as I was getting ready to put the dowel holes into these corresponding parts, it occurred to me that I'm gonna be removing a lot of this material later on. So I'm gonna be doing a little cutout here. All of this material is going away. And of course, I have to do my final cut to length of the aprons later on. And so I need to make sure that I don't put dowels in a place where they're going to get exposed to later, especially up front here. That would be a disaster of epic proportions. So I had to be careful about it and do all of my layout on the fronts of these aprons with all the cutouts and things that are going to happen to make sure that I don't make that mistake. But I've done that, and yeah, some of this is going to get removed when I actually go to run it through the thickness planer and create that taper that I showed you earlier. But I did carry over some of those layout lines over the edges. And of course, I know that these edges are square, so I'll be able to pick those lines up again later in order to mark where I'm cross-cutting these to final length and all that jazz. So this is the weapon of choice for this particular operation. This is the Dowelmax joinery system. I absolutely love this. And I've done a couple of videos about this joinery system. I had an old one that I used for years and years. I mean, I used the crap out of it. And so I posted a glowing review in a video format about it. And then Dowelmax caught wind of that and they said, hey, we have a very much updated version of that you should check out. And we're going to send it to you. So they did. And then I did a video about that one, which is this one. I really like this for the sake of aligning parts in particular. Like when I do panel glue ups, I use dowels for alignment's sake instead of clamping calls. I did a video about that as well. And I also like it for smaller parts like this. I find that the accuracy for alignment's sake is actually better with this Dowelmax than it is even with my domino joiner, which is many times more expensive. So that's what's going to get used for this operation. Oh, I almost forgot to tell you. So the reason I'm going through all this effort to drill these alignment holes before I taper the board is because this Dowelmax is designed to clamp to a board that has parallel faces. If I cut this taper that you can see on this black line here, it may cause the jig to kind of clamp up a little bit wonky, a little crooked. It may or may not, but I don't even want to take the risk. There is a little bit of flex in these pads here, on the clamping pads. They can wiggle around a little bit and kind of conform to a slightly out of parallel face. But yeah, I don't want to take that chance. So I'm cutting these alignment holes while my faces are parallel to each other and then milling it down with the taper. so I'm done tapering those parts, and then I set them aside because I had a long weekend coming up. So it's been Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and now I am back in my shop trying to remember where I left off and what to do next. Okay, so I've done my pondering and I think I've got it figured out. So when I did the thickness planing with the taper on these aprons, I removed all of the layout lines that I had drawn on the faces of those boards, but thankfully I left many of those layout lines on the top of the board as well. So I'll be able to transfer those over to the face and reestablish all the layout lines that I had drawn on these earlier to just make sure I was doing everything right. So once I've done that, I can then move on to shaping. I have to do the cloud lifts or cutouts or whatever you want to call them on these aprons. And then I need to finish doing some shaping on the legs. Once all that shaping is done, I'll be able to move on to joinery, which I think will be an episode to come. Let's do some shaping because that is one of my favorite things in all of woodworking to do. Okay, so I've reestablished my layout lines, and in so doing, I also went over them again with white pencils instead of black pencils. So what I normally use to mark out almost all of my joinery is this guy here. This is a mechanical pencil with a 0.5 millimeter lead in it, and the tip is retractable, which is great for woodworkers because otherwise you're going to be breaking that tip off left and right. And of course, you can remove the little cap on the back, and you got a little eraser there that you can work with. So this is what I like for most of my marking out of joinery. It's this guy here. I'll put a link in the description if you want to pick one up, presuming I can find it. With walnut, however, when you use a really thin pencil lead like that, that pencil lead is hard to see. And if it's with the grain, it basically disappears. It's not going to work so good. So what I like to use instead are a couple of options. One is this Fons and Porter fabric marking pencil. This has got a white lead in it. And of course, because it's a mechanical, you don't have to sharpen it all the time. So for fine points across the grain, and then particularly on end grain, this is a great marking pencil to use for that. But sometimes when you're going with the grain, this one's hard to see too. I don't know why, but it is. And so if you're okay with sharpening a lot, or you just want a thicker line that's easier to see, this is also a good option. This is General's Charcoal White. I was unaware that white charcoal is a thing that exists, but in any event, whatever this lead is made of, it does mark walnut very clearly. So that's what I use to reestablish my layout lines. And now I got to cut out these little curves, and these curves are kind of sharp. So that requires me to change out my bandsaw blade. And I'm not comfortable being the one to show you how to change out bandsaw blades efficiently. I'm not very efficient at it myself. But I swapped out the 3/4 inch blade in here that I use like 95% of the time for some big, long, straight rips or just subtle curves, and put in a 3/8 inch blade into the bandsaw. Like I said, I'm going to stay in my lane and not really show you all that, but I did do a YouTube short about how to adjust the guides on this such that they're as close as you can get to the blade without actually touching them. So maybe check that out if you're curious. And also another little tool I like to use is this thing. This is called the Easy Tension. So this guy here has different little markings on it for setting how much this little set screw sticks out from the side of the tool. And it's got a magnet top and bottom. You stick that to the side of your blade, and then you increase the tension on your blade until one of these magnets pops loose. And then you know you've got the exact right tension for whatever width blade you have set this to. So this is available at easytension.com. Not a sponsor, but I do like this tool because prior to that I was using the little sticker on the inside of my bandsaw, and that little sticker turned out to be a magnet, and it was not positioned correctly. So I was just breaking bandsaw blades left and right because I didn't know any better. Eventually I figured it out, and I don't really go by that, nor do I go by feel, because then I either end up with a blade that's often too floppy or under such high tension that I break it easily. For me, who's more of a hand tool user, this is a neat little tool to use. And of course, because it's magnetic, I can just stick it to the side of my bandsaw. Now that I got my 3/8 inch blade in here and adjusted, I'm gonna go ahead and cut out all these little curves. Alright, so the bandsaw action went about as good as I could have hoped. I got all my cutouts in place now, and it's starting to take shape. So this is the front apron, You can see it's got this cloud lift in the middle of it, as we like to call it. Eventually I'm going to be cutting out this straight section in the middle to become a big, wide pencil drawer. So that's yet to come. And then on the side aprons, I have the bottom section and the top section that is vertical, mounting to the top there. But before I glue that on, I want to put a little chamfer so I don't have this sharp edge sticking out where that step is. And of course, whatever I do for the chamfer on the side aprons, I will want to do on the front apron as well. That helps soften this sharp edge at the leading edge of the desk where you might rest your elbows. So it has an important ergonomic function on top of just looking nice. So I'm going to grab my block plane. I have a little chamfer attachment for that is really good for this kind of work. So it's just perfectly even all the way down these long stretches like on this front apron. And once I've done that, I'll be in a position to glue these parts onto the side aprons and then cut the aprons to their final length. By the way, you'll notice that these aprons have this curve in them that is not just a simple quarter circle. This has kind of a variable curvature to it. And what I use to achieve that is one of these little French curves here. This is from Stooling Toolworks. These are awesome for marking out curves that have a little bit more of an attractive look to them than a standard, arc of a circle. Okay, so I went and grabbed my block plane. This is the Veritas low angle plane, and it has since been replaced with a different model where the little divots in the sides have a different shape to them. I rather like these actually, but in any event, I swapped out the front shoe from the sole. This unscrews right off the front of the plane, and you can replace it with this nifty little chamfer guide. And they still make the chamfer guide to go with their newer version of this block plane. So you can still get one. And what it does is it threads in place of where the shoe was. And then you can adjust the width of your chamfer from above here with a couple of screws. And of course, you also have some adjustability in the depth of cut as well. But it provides a handy guide. And of course, a depth stop of sorts is kind of built in with the width of these little wings here. First things first, I have to mark my work so I know when to stop cutting. I don't want to make my chamfer so big that it actually undercuts or goes underneath this board that I'm going to be attaching later. So what I have here is a mark showing where my final cut to length is going to be. And so beyond that mark is going to be removed later anyways. And what I'm going to do is just hold this up to the lower part of the apron and then just trace a line on the outside of my final cut to width. And now I have a line on top here that tells me when to stop cutting my chamfers. As far as work holding goes, my leg vise is perfectly capable of handling this kind of wedge-shaped apron, so that's not really an issue. But on the other end here, I need some sort of support underneath it to kind of keep this from moving down on me if I apply too much force. And you can see that the dog holes in my sliding dead man are much too far away to really support it. And that's where this little contraption comes in handy. This is a Veritas Wonder Pup, and this is really useful in this application. So what I like to do is get a little bit of a rhythm going. Oh, wrong way, other way. And in this case, I'm going to be maxing it out. So even though this isn't really lubricated, it still moves pretty easily if you just get that little rhythm going. Put that on my sliding dead man, and now I have a support that's way up here. Like that. It's above the work surface here, so I know that the wings on my block plane aren't going to be interfered with by the workbench top. And now I have a nice comfortable position from which to apply these chamfers. Now in a case like this kind of chamfer guide here, of course, is set to a 45-degree angle, but the angle on the board that I'm using as a reference is not a 45, it's inside of that. So what I need to do is reference the top wing of this chamfer guide to the top of the workpiece so that the 45 is referencing from the top and not the side. Hope that makes sense. So I'm going to come in here like this, holding down that upper wing to the top of this workpiece. I have my marking line back here that I can keep an eye on. And I'll just keep working it down until I've just kissed that pencil line, but haven't removed it. And of course, if it turns out that I'm running against the grain too much and I'm getting kind of an ugly cut, I can always run this block plane in the opposite direction the exact same way. All right, now I'm smoothing out the bandsaw marks on the undersides of the aprons. Everything here has got rough bandsaw marks on it, including this curvature. And I've already started on this, and what I'm using for this is a round-bottomed spoke shave. This is a Veritas spoke shave. And as long as the round bottom is rounder or a tighter circle than the circle you're trying to plane from, theoretically it should work. So what I'm going to try to do is kind of dig out these bandsaw marks, keeping an eye on the layout lines that I left on the edges here, and then see how it goes. And if it doesn't go great, if it's chattery, if I introduce just a little bit of a skew as I make the cut, then it often cuts a little bit smoother. And then often all it needs after that is to, just kind of blade marks and stuff like that, just hitting it with a little bit of sandpaper, and then it's a perfectly acceptable surface that is ready for finish in the long run. And then I like to come and work on the straight parts of the aprons with either a flat bottom spoke shave, or if there's no curvature present where I need to get in tight to it, I can just use a block plane or even a jack plane or something like that. So I'm going to keep working on these edges, see if I can't get up in here. And if that doesn't work, I have a backup plan. The round bottom spoke shave actually went pretty well. It was a little bit tough to hit this kind of end grain right here, but I was able to get it pretty well. I think sandpaper will take care of the rest of that pretty easily. So I'm good there. And then I used a flat bottom, where's the flat bottom? Flat bottom spoke shave, like this one, to work that transition right there. Because I do kind of have a high spot right there. And then I have bandsaw marks all along here. And of course, I'm going to start by knocking down the high spots with the block plane. Like that. And eventually, I'll get down to where I'm hitting the whole length of it and removing these bandsaw blade marks. And this isn't a critical joinery surface or anything like that, so I really don't have to worry about whether or not this is perfectly flat or perfectly square. I'm going to do the best I can. I'm going to check my progress with an old straight edge. Rest it on top here and see if it rocks. It's a tiny bit of a rock right here. And if I come back this way, there's a little bit of a rock right here. So those are my high spots I want to address. And now it's all right in the middle, which is kind of where I want it, honestly, because that's easy to get to with the block plane. And then, of course, I can get down here close and sight down the length of this and see how it looks to the eye. And it looks pretty good. It's pretty straight. It's right on my layout line. Basically splitting that layout line in half. I think we're all good here. All I have to do is maybe touch this up with a little bit of sandpaper, break any hard edges, and that part is all set to go. And so I got the underside of these curves on these aprons nice and smooth with the spoke shaves, and of course I can touch those up with sandpaper later and make them even nicer. It's a little bit different animal when it comes to these parts that fit on top of the aprons. So I have, not only do I have a step here, but I also want it to come down to a smooth transition to this already finished top here. So if I were to glue this on first and then try to smooth this, then I would probably tag the top of this. And like I said, it's already finished. I don't want to mess something up that's already ready to go. And if I leave it detached and try to shape it the same way using the spoke shaves, I have a kind of a nice edge on the end of this right here that's liable to break off with the force required to kind of dress this end here and get the bandsaw marks off of it. So what I'm going to have to do is go over to my oscillating spindle sander. I went and picked up my Wen oscillating belt and spindle sander, model 6524, I believe, from the floor of my shop over here. Funny story about this. Back when I first got it, I used the heck out of it because I was working on my signature Bargueño desk at the time, if I recall correctly. I got familiar enough with it that I felt comfortable doing a tool review on it on YouTube that ended up doing pretty well. And in the intervening months, it has stopped oscillating. So it no longer moves up and down in the table. So I'm going to have to call Wen and see if and what they're willing to do about this. And maybe I'll get back to you on that with another channel update. But in the meantime, I'm just kind of dealing with it. So it no longer moves up and down, but I can still do what I need to do. And cases like this, when a spindle sander of some kind is really the best option for whatever operation I'm doing. So now I have to do these curves, and this has the belt attachment in it instead of a spindle, and that's fine with me because this diameter is much larger than this diameter, and it matches the diameter or the radius, variable radius in this case, of this curve a little bit better than this smaller drum does. I'm going to go ahead and remove these bandsaw marks and fear the curves down to my layout lines, and then I should be sitting pretty. And I'll just work my way through the grits. I believe this is a 120. After this, I'll probably throw a 180 and then maybe even I think I have some 240 belts around, and that will make it nice and smooth. So that's what I have yet to do. And then once I'm done with these, I'll be pretty close to gluing them on. I just have one more thing to do, which is to smooth the faces. I have layout lines on here right now, and of course I don't want that to be in the final product. And also because of the lip that's going to be right below this, I won't be able to get this to this with a smoothing plane later on. And then I'll be in a position from which I can finally glue these on. I've been working towards that goal for quite some time, it seems. Oh, and by the way, while I'm thinking about it, the hose on my Festool vacuum fits into this Wen port perfectly. So I'm pretty happy about that. It does a pretty good job of sucking a lot of the dust down in here. That said, there's still a lot of dust that just flies off the end of the belt and into the air. So I'm going to go ahead and wear a dust mask while I'm doing this. Probably put on some safety glasses as well, just to keep the dust out of my eyes a little bit better. Even though there is dust collection on this machine, it's far from perfect. Oh, and another thing. Sometimes the machine vibrates a little bit, and when it does so, it might start to kind of walk across the table a little bit. If it does that, I can always clamp it down onto this multifunction table. But right now, I think I'm just going to try to do it without that, because I only have these two parts to do. It's not like I'm parked here for a while and having to deal with that nuisance for very long, even if it does do that. Good time. So I did that, and now these are down to 180 grit. I thought I might do 240 after this, but these are already like glassy smooth, and I'll probably adjust them with some hand sanding as well, especially when it comes to these edges here, just kind of soften them. I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, so to address these feathered edges, kind of even them out, I have these gained together so they're nice and even with each other, and I clamp down with some sacrificial softwood underneath them. This is just like an old 2x4. And I'm going to go ahead and chop the first one about a 90-degree angle, make it nice and clean. Yeah, it's not quite 90. That's looking pretty good. And then in line with that, I'm going to do the adjacent one. Make sure I got all my chisel on there. There we go. Now those are nice and even with each other, and I don't have a feathered edge that's going to slough off or lift off after I've glued this piece on. So looking good. Uh-oh, now I've done it. So I'm smooth planing the faces of these, and it occurred to me that the grain direction on this one in particular runs that way, and I don't want to put this thin point against a planing stop. That would wreck it, and I don't really have a good way of immobilizing it otherwise, at least over here at this workbench. But I did figure something out. I figured out that over here at my multifunction table, I do have dog stops that are round, which is useful for this portion of the workpiece. So I'm going to drop one of these in a hole somewhere like so. Now I need to keep it from sliding off of that. So what I'm going to do is put one of these surface clamps right in here like this. Now it wedges in between them. And that alone is probably good enough to do this. But I think I can secure it better if I do something like this. Put a stop against that side, just flatten that out, and maybe put a clamp on here. Now this is really immobilized in there, and I should be able to smooth plane that just fine. So word of warning, this multifunction table isn't really designed for handwork so much, so it is going to wiggle and wobble and all those things. That said, despite its exorbitant price, I do find it awful useful for a lot of things, even though I'm more of a hand tool guy. I use it as a surface for finishing small parts. You saw I had my oscillating spindle and belt sander over here earlier. Any routing I do with a powered router I do over here. And of course I do cross cuts with the track saw. So yeah, there's a lot of operations I can do over here that would be difficult to do on a regular kind of hand tool user's bench. Ooh, that is like butter. There we go. That's nice and clean now. I think I can glue that on. few notes about this glue up before I go ahead and do it. So for one thing, it's that time of year where I have to warm up my hide glue in order for it to flow well. If you let hide glue like this get cold, it's going to flow like molasses. It's going to stick all over everything. It's just going to be a big mess. It's going to be a pain. So I did a YouTube short about how I go about gently warming up my liquid hide glue. I don't just throw it in the microwave and nuke the crap out of it. So go check that out if you're curious. Another thing is, because this is ultimately going to be a prominent show face along here, I don't want any glue squeeze out there at all. It'd be very hard to address if that were to happen. I don't mind if it squeezes out the back. I can clean that off. I don't care if I get a little bit of it on my bench, but basically what I'm going to do is put my dowels in there just for alignment's sake. I'm not even really going to glue the dowels on both sides. Go ahead and clamp it up and clamp it flat like this. That will encourage even better alignment than the dowels alone will. Hopefully none of that glue rises up out of that joint there to where I have to clean it up later. It's on, and it doesn't appear to be squeezing out yet. Look at there. Clip it right here. Everything's nice and tight, and I don't see any squeeze out on this side. That's what I want. I'm going to move this over. Next. So after watching that, I suppose you have a few questions. You probably are wondering why I didn't use more glue. Typically on YouTube, when you see a woodworker do a glue up, they use insane amounts of glue. Glue all over the place. Glue that squeezes out of the joint, every nook, crevice, cranny in the project, and dripping all over the floor. Any glue that comes out of a joint when you clamp it up is by definition superfluous. You only need enough to cover the inside of the joint, not the outside of the joint. So I didn't use that much glue, in part because of that reason, but also because, like I said, I don't want any squeeze out on the front side of that apron. Also, I'm not really relying on those two parts to be structurally that strong. So that glue joint doesn't have to be 100% perfect. 80% is just fine. Also, you might be asking, why didn't I use more clamps? That's one thing about the long grain to long grain joints. If you do a good job of aligning those joints to each other, and I edge planed them down, made sure both surfaces were straight and both were square, and it went together without glue in a dry fit such that there was like no gaps whatsoever. So if you're able to achieve that, then you don't necessarily need as much glue for that to be that strong, because you're not relying on the glue to hold parts together that don't quite mate up perfectly. So I hope that makes sense. Now that that's glued up, the last thing for me to do is to cut these aprons to final length. And that can be a little bit complicated too because of the shape of these aprons. And that will probably wrap up this episode of this build. All right, now I'm over here at the Festool MFT, aka the multifunction table, getting ready to do my final cross cuts with the track saw of these aprons. If I do this right and everything goes well, I should be able to go straight from whatever cut I get here to going to the joinery. It's really great to be able to do that. I don't have to remove handsaw marks with my shooting board or anything like that. That said, if I do need to make a minor adjustment after doing a cross cut here, I can go to that shooting board and kind of address it there. But hopefully I can come straight off the saw to joinery. Now, if you're looking at getting a Festool MFT, they do make a version of this that comes accessorized with like a back rail. There's like a protractor dealie. There's a little hinge that you can lift up and lower your track saw track with. I personally have found that lacking when it comes to fine furniture making. The accuracy just isn't there. It's probably fine for framing houses, maybe even trim carpentry, but in my personal experience, that stuff is fiddly, pain in the butt. That isn't very accurate. Thankfully though, there are many third-party manufacturers of MFT accessories that are great. One of them is TSO, so they make all these bench dogs in different heights. They make planing stops like these, which I'm using here to back up this reference edge to. Another third-party manufacturer of MFT accessories is UJK, which I think is out of the UK. In any event, they make these bench dogs that actually tighten from the top. These are really cool. So normally if you want to really tighten down a bench dog, you have to thread in a thumb screw from underneath the table, so you're crawling around underneath your table like a critter. These are great. You can tighten them from the top, and these particular ones are really good height for doing cross cuts at the MFT. And then they have these rail clips. These clips just clip right onto those same bench dogs, because you're referencing off these bench dogs, which are themselves inserted into these 20mm holes. You have dead nuts accuracy when it comes to getting a perpendicular cut. You even have third-party manufacturers like Veritas. Like they make a planing stop like this that fits into these 20mm dog holes. So you have options. If you're trying to make your MFT do a certain something or other, there's probably a third-party manufacturer that makes something that allows you to do that. So I got this all set up. I have this pressed against the fence with a surface clamp, and then I have it clamped down to the table with another clamp back here. So this is being held in place perfectly perpendicular to my track saw track, and you'll see under here I have saved one of those little wedge-shaped pieces that I used when I planed the wedge shape into these aprons. That's helping to support the face of this apron parallel to the table and of course the track itself. So that all helps. And then the one issue I have to be concerned about up here is that as the circular saw blade goes through this, it might lift some fibers off here. The track has like a rubber kind of splinter guard on it that helps quite a lot. So I'm going to get a clean cut probably, but just to be extra safe to do the belt and suspenders approach, I'm going to come here to where my layout line is and put a piece of green frog tape over that. Right over the line. It's already lined up, so I don't have to worry about missing that. And I'm going to wrap it right over the back here, because also when the track saw exits the cut, it can blow out some of these fibers back here as well. That's probably even more of a concern. And that can be cleaned up with planes and stuff like that after the fact. I always leave my surface prep for the last possible moment in cases like this where you might have little minor bits of damage or tear out or splintering or whatever that need addressing later on. Okay, so that initial cut went according to plan, except for being off my layout line just a tiny bit, which is something that's easily addressed on the shooting board should these aprons turn out to be slightly different lengths. For the cut on the opposite end, you can see I just kind of flipped the whole operation around. So I got the wedge under this end, and I got my TSO planing stop back there. And thankfully it's thick enough to support the workpiece, but not so thick it's going to interfere with the track. The same is true for the surface clamp. It doesn't stick out any higher than the workpiece, so that won't interfere with my track saw track either. So I'm just going to throw some tape over the back of that layout line and do this cross cut as well. Okay, so I cross-cut the side aprons to final length, and they're matching up pretty close. I might have to address one or both of those with my shooting board, but in the meantime, I have left my rear apron for last. And the reason I did that is because this front apron, even though I've cut the ends to their final cuts, this apron is not cut to final length yet. And the reason for that is there's going to be a big drawer right in the middle of here. So I'm going to cut out a big old pencil drawer. And because I'm going to be cutting this center section of this board out, there's going to be the width of the kerf at both ends of this that are going to be subtracting from the overall length of this front apron. So I need to account for that before I cut that rear apron to final length in order to get the front and rear aprons to match each other. I hope that makes sense. So I'm going to go ahead, and I have some layout lines right here and here. I'm going to go ahead and cut this with my carcass saw and then address those sawn ends with the shooting board plane. And then once I've done that, I'll kind of squish all these parts together and see what the overall length is, transfer that to my rear apron, and then I'll be able to cut that rear apron to its final length. And of course, one of the reasons I did that is because I wanted the grain pattern in this walnut to be continuous all the way across the front of the desk. If I were to cut this center drawer, this drawer front, from a different piece of wood, it would match the ends. And who wants that? It's good design to try to keep this contiguous. Alright, so I got a nice assemblage of parts going here, and I think this is a good spot to stop because I like to cheat these videos, right around an hour or so. But one of the things that I hope you've picked up, even though I haven't gotten that far along in the process of building this piece of furniture, I've had to think like a chess player ahead, 2 steps, 3 steps, 4 steps, in order to spare myself some trouble in the long run. So that's the kind of thing that just comes with the territory of building furniture, of course, but you may only learn those things by screwing those things up yourself. So I hope in the course of watching these build videos, you can see some of the scenarios in which I've had to do that, and hopefully you can do that for yourself on your own projects in your own shops. If you watched through the entirety of this video, I certainly appreciate it. I got the holiday break coming up. Happy solstice to you. Happy Ramahana Kwanzaamas, or whatever it is you celebrate. Happy New Year's. I hope you have a good time this holiday season with your family and friends, and if not, I hope you get out to commune with nature. That always seems to work well for me. I will pick up again with you after all of that. When we do that, I'll finish doing the shaping on these legs, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the joinery, which is always a fun time. Hope you'll join me for that. In the meantime, have a good holiday season. I'll catch you then. Now, if you like what you saw here, please hit like and subscribe. It would help me out a lot. Also hit the little bell icon if you want to be notified anytime I release a new video. And if you didn't like what you saw here, keep it to yourself, pal. Or watch one of my other videos. You might like one of those. Thank you for watching.